Pleasure to see you all here. We're here to listen to stories of different projects done in the Office of Science over the course of the last 50 years. Somebody on Monday afternoon said, "How does Claus get 50 years?" And I said, "Well, you best check with him," but he tells us that he started as an intern at Argonne in 1966. Of course, that was a pretty good year, right? It was the one I went to university, so we have good memories of that time. Anyway, to get on with the program, the first speaker this afternoon is Roger Dixon. He amused my assistant because his biography begins, "I began my education at Pot Creek Elementary School, located in a logging camp near Taos." He points out pot stands for pottery. Okay, so nobody gets it. Okay, he then got a PhD at Purdue. He was a postdoc at Cornell. I met him at Fermilab. He worked initially for Helen Edwards, so a little bit like Claus, she played a big part in his life. He had a number of positions at Fermilab. Several of them in the experimental physics division, where he built the D0 experiment, and he was my boss on several occasions. The one occasion, when he maybe wasn't my boss, he was head of accelerator, and in that position, he actually told the lab director that, "No, you are not the person shutting off the teletron. Helen Edwards will do that." So clearly, a little bit like theorists, head of accelerator division, they don't listen to many people. There are other stories. Howard Frank is in the audience. He and Roger proposed an experiment using the little European bubble chamber. They came to the PAC and they said, "Here, this is the little European bubble chamber." They failed to mention the truckloads of cryogenics that were out back. So they got approval and then took all the money. Anyway, this afternoon, Roger's task is to tell us a little bit about some projects on the prairie. Roger.
Thank you, Mont. It's great to be here. My inclination, instead of getting right into my talk, anyway, so a large part of the story has to do with superconducting accelerator that Wilson had in mind probably when he came to Fermilab. And so I thought I would start out showing you something that we don't have anymore, a very nice phone book. This is the 1969 edition, and notice we were, well, I was going to say good looking, well, they were powerful. Anyway, he looks serious, and he started way early at the lab. And in fact, I believe, and he can verify this, that everybody was still in Oakbrook when he started. So that goes way back before me. So I just wanted to review the qualifications cryogenics and building a tevatron. He had a degree in electrical engineering. By the way, you're free to tell me I'm wrong. And he started actually in what was called the B transfer group or department, something like that. And he was doing what all good electrical engineers should do, figuring out how to make the magnets, numbers of magnets, so on, that would extract beam from the accelerator. And so that's what he worked on first. But apparently, something about liquid helium attracted him. I know how I got, I'll tell you how I got, well, I got attracted later. Liquid helium sometimes makes a lot of noise, and that's fun. Anyway, he worked on transfer line, heat exchangers, refrigerators, and so on. I'll get a little bit more into that. And one of the more interesting things that we all had to do, but Claus was really good at this, I'm told, is run a large cryogenic system with really crappy computers and alarms. And when you were dealing with up to and over 100 quenches a month, I did a little bit of that myself in a different way. And then to show that he really was a good engineer and scientist, actually won the Scott Award with J. Thiel after for a cryo conference paper where they described some things that were not known about two-phase helium flow that they learned at Fermi-Lab. So this is the original drawings for Fermi-Lab back in 1969. This is from the Aurora Beacon News, and this is the best drawing I can find for what was planned. You can see it's pretty much right. There are a few little details that are wrong there, and sort of interesting. And it turns out that all the way back at the beginning, when we were, people like me were excited. I wasn't at the lab, but we were excited that there was going to be a 200 MeV accelerator. And I did visit the lab, as you'll see later, back in that time. And already, and probably before this, Bob Wilson had the notion that he wanted to build a superconducting accelerator. And this was a big stretch because not that many superconducting magnets had been made, and we were talking about building 1,000 magnets to make a superconducting accelerator. Anyway, Wilson brought that up in congressional hearings in 1971, and then work began in earnest maybe a little before 1973. I mean, people like Ellen Edwards were building superconducting magnets and so on at some point during that time. And so here's kind of an early timeline. Claus joining. I visited the lab, but I didn't see Claus. 1972, the first 200 MeV beam was extracted from the accelerator, and I was lurking behind the 38-inch bubble chamber trying to put some wide gap chambers together. I was a graduate student. And then superconducting magnet R&D began in earnest in 1973, and I note here that some of it was noisy. Superconducting magnets can quench, and you have to have the quench protection over the entire magnet. We learned that lesson 2 or 3 times at Fermi-Lab. I did it once, and then we learned it again at the LHC at some point. So that's interesting. I didn't actually start at the lab until 1977, and then something happened shortly after I started, and maybe Claus can enlighten us on it, but there was this left bend project, which was to take the big bend to the meson lab, which is a 20-degree bend, and make it into a superconducting bend, and run it initially with the old conventional accelerator. And I know a lot of the experimenters are not happy with this because it seemed very risky. And I was the one who got to do that. And of course, I would have never done it successfully, but Claus occasionally offered me something in very short snippets something that was very useful. And in getting this through this project, before we put in the left bin, we did some measurements on magnets that Ellen wanted done to measure energy disposition, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, then here the rest of the timeline: 1981, sector test, main ring enclosure, A sector, and that was one where Claus and Jay were trying to run the big cryo system and make it run, and Tevatron turned on for fixed target in 1983, embarked people in Salgo. So when we started working on superconducting magnets for the energy doublet, which is one of the things it was called, this is my imagination, everybody wondering what's an energy doublet. And one of the things that was needed to build a big superconducting machine was a lot of transfer line. So Claus, somehow he was an electrical engineer, but he decided I will get involved and we'll come up with a transfer line. And okay, something like this. Of course, it needed to be a lot longer than that. But I think we eventually got that point. And so, so what happened was Claus began working on transfer line, and at some point he was involved in the refrigeration too. People were working on magnets and trying to build good magnets. There was a test string at B12 with Dewar deflectors because we were learning about how things could get blown around in a superconducting magnet. And Helen and Jim Walton were working on their own version of a superconducting magnet, which they did build, but which was never used for anything. And Helen asked me to do some quench measurements in the switchyard before we put the left bend in to test energy doublet magnets for energy deposition. And I'm not sure why this was done. It had been done a little bit before that, but I think, I'll explain it. I guess it's got a little out of order, but okay. So Claus went from this little thing he came up with, again, with the full-fledged transfer line, expansion boxes and everything. And then the whole cryogenic system consisted of large central helium liquefier, 24 satellites. There was some controversy, mainly around Claus, vertical and horizontal heat exchangers. And, well, we built horizontal heat exchangers. And then there were miles of liquid helium transfer line that had to be built. And I'm told that Claus was the person who decided they should go under the road to get over to the Tevatron from the central helium liquefier, rather than over where it would have been somewhat exposed. And so this building all this transfer line was quite an accomplishment, and this is a little celebration at some point after it was all done. I don't know who all these people are to ask Claus about them. That's Jay Bilacker. And in 1983, the International Historical Mechanical Engineering Landmark was given to present to Fermi Lab, and it's still on the first 15th floor of the building, and it marks it as a National Historic Engineering Landmark, which is pretty down. So now, things with the Tevatron, even though if you talk to the people that were working on it and trying to run it with really bad computing and so on, we had a lot to learn. But those things were going well. Claus had the cryogenics under control. He would sometimes have to make miles of paper plots by hand to figure out what was going on, but he was good at that. And then came this risky project, which Claus certainly gave advice on. And we did the tests and put magnets down into the switchyard, which is a horrible place, narrow little tunnel. Why we didn't build this hatch long enough to put the magnet straight down in, because Alvin Polship was very worried about us tipping them up like that. but it was quite a rigging job. And we initially put 2 down to do Helen's test, and then we put something more than 20 down to do the rest of the work. So we were also fortunate to have an excellent cartoonist, blues guitar player, and actually the best septum maker and separator maker ever to draw cartoons for us and keep us going. So this is what came of the energy deposition measurements. And like I said, others have been done. I think what Helen was doing, I never got to ask her, was there was this young guy from the Soviet Union who she brought to me one day who had just written Mars program in graduate school. And I think Helen was suspicious of the program we were using, Andy was the keeper of. And so she wanted Nikolai to do the simulations for measurement, because she wanted to see if, wanted reassurance that both programs would give the same result. So we did the measurements, we wrote the paper. This was the most fun paper I ever had to write, because my main job in writing this paper was to remove the detrimental adjectives that Andy had put in front of Nikolai's software, description of Nikolai's software. And now, of course, Mars is used all over the place by lots of people, so I guess it worked. So here's our little tunnel where we put this cryogenic system in, and we did blow up those 2 magnets that we did the energy deposition measurements in. That was very exciting, and we learned about how cryogenics could be very tricky. This is me refusing to believe there's frost over here and thinking we're going to get this cold anyway, even if I have to fill the whole tunnel with frost. Of course, that never worked. We finally got it done all right. While we were doing that, people were busy installing the Tevatron magnets. And finally, this I think near the end, Leon and Phil were looking and very happy that it was already done. And this is Helen, and I have to say something about Helen, since she passed away about exactly a month ago today. And she was really something special. And she made all of this work. That's her signing the sheet when the last magnet was put in. And of course, they got the National Medal of Science for making this very large superconducting accelerator board. So this is kind of what happened, an overview for everything. After the Tevatron was done, we needed a Tevatron 1 project to make antiprotons, because the plan was to make a collider. And the plan was to do a big collider and fix target for a while. And so John Peoples led, he was the project manager for building the antiproton source. Meanwhile, Steve Holmes led the project for building a better injector for the Tevatron, the main injector, and replaced the original main ring, which since I was on D0, I never really wanted the main ring replaced, because for some reason, the accelerator people ran the bypass over the top of CDF. But to get even with me or Mons or somebody, they decided it had to go right through the calorimeter in D0. And so D0 managed to work around it. And another innovative thing that happened was the recycler ring, which was later misused. Bill Foster and Jerry Jackson invented it, but it eventually used to cool antiprotons very successfully in Tevatron Run 2, I'll talk about later, and then fixed target run continued and diminished. It's still running at the present time, and this is when the colliders started taking place. So I already mentioned this. Oh, no, I didn't. This is run 2. So here's what we did in the last run of the Tevatron. Electron cooling was commissioned in 2005. Luminosity went up dramatically. This was invented by Sergei Nagaitsev. And CDF and D0, I think that was 5. Anyway, they saw that new proton, antiproton Tevatron shut down in 2011. And actually, that's me out in the tent outside. We had a little ceremony at the lab, CDF and Deidre. This, by the way, is Bob Wilson. And I like to show this photo because I grew up out west. But I'm also always careful to point out that had I been the one in this photo, I would have been curled up right over there by the fence instead of running around. So here we are, turning off the Tevatron. These were special people that I invited to the control room, and it wasn't, Garrett didn't actually want to turn off the Tevatron, but he wanted to be there, and I wanted Ellen to be there. And you know how sometimes you can't put two particles somewhere. Solve the problem. And you notice this is a Russian version of a cowboy hat. There's a story about that too. Some people high in the laboratory call us cowboys, and Ellen wanted to be cowboys. Anyway, this is her aborting the and then dumping the ramp. She shut the Tevatron off forever in September 2011. And this is all I got out of it. One of my department heads gave me an award, Doomsday Captain, which this is the best award I ever got. And now, the Tevatron tunnel is a good place to go fishing. This is actually a fake photo. Okay, so here's just a few comments to finish with about what it's like to work with Claus. I got these mainly from Jay and Rich. Claus was unorthodox. He had suggestions that were helpful once you understood them. He was rather cryptic. He made things happen, much like Helen, but he wasn't fiery like Helen. And here's an example of a cryptic comment that Jay eventually figured out. This was taped to the back of his chair. They wanted a wet shot. Jay wasn't sure what to do about that. And he said Claus thought much faster than he could talk. And maybe that's true. He made things happen, most of it did. And he made engineering plots on a pad and taped them to the wall of the main control room, wrapped around 3 walls. And we already talked about the transfer. So,
So, by way of project management comment, Roger mentioned that John Peoples did the TEB 1 project. So I, at some point, needed to write a R&D, because it was anti-proton cooling, and you didn't know it was going to work, so it was obviously R&D, right? Not construction project at all. Okay, so let's move on. The next speaker, without him, I think we wouldn't be here. So Richard York got his PhD in 1976. He was one of the people usually recognized for conceiving CBAF, and also was one of the first to work on CBAF. He then worked also at the Superconducting Supercollider Lab, and eventually at NSCL and FRIB at MSU. So with that, let me ask you to please welcome Richard York.
Okay, so it's a privilege and an honor to be here. I'm very pleased I got the opportunity to return, seeing lots of old friends. If you go up on the second floor, it says the beginning up there about CBAF. I was going to start there and sort of walk through a timeline to get you there. I must say that Claus, you look wonderful, as they say. This is a picture of him when he first came to CBAF. in February of '86. And I guess we can say that he was able to hold a job, because 30 years later, is now retiring. All right. I want to thank Deborah McGaldy and Wes Anderson for helping me get the graphics here, because there's sort of, as you might guess, some archiving going on. So, as many of you may know, in the 70s, electron probes were used to understand very well the beginnings of understanding of what's going on inside the nucleus. Okay, but if you could measure things in coincidence, then you could get a more clearer understanding. And what that meant was that you would like the electrons hitting the experiment to come continuously. Okay, it's called a continuous wave or high duty factor. All right. At the time, many of the electron accelerators were at a very intense bunch, very short duration, and which wasn't suitable for that. And so you were looking for a way to have the electrons be coming continuously. So there was a Friedlander panel who said actually it recommended looking into the feasibility of that, and in fact, if it did look feasible, put it at a high priority. In '79, there was a conference looking at the future possibilities of electron accelerators, just to look and see what the possibilities were to design these CW machines. And in that same year, INSAC was basically formed. And their first long-range plan, if you want to call it that, in fact, was recommending the construction of such a machine, a high-energy, huge EV electron accelerator. Okay. The next year, in 1980, SURA was formed. And under that label, there was a proposal made to the Department of Energy. In this particular case, it was for the research and development of a CW machine, this LINAC pulse generator, all right, which had an energy of about 4 GeV and was to have a high duty factor. Those are the two attributes that you remember that the scientists wanted to pursue their program. In '81, there was a feasibility study, it says, of a 4-GeV LINAC. Okay, this is speak for, yes, it is feasible. Okay. Later that year and the following year in '82, there was a determination that not only should it be a high duty factor, it should have 4-GeV. There was some discussion in the community of a few GeV being enough, and there were others, particularly in the SURA camp, who felt it should be 4-GeV or higher. So that was a very important milestone. And they continued the development of this case, looking at new horizons electromagnetic physics, pursuing the physics case for such a machine. Okay, and SURA put in a proposal, as you all know, to not look at the design, but actually to propose to build the design. Okay, again, this is a 4-GeV machine that had a high duty factor. It was called the National Electron Accelerator Lab. The LINAC was a low duty factor, very short duration pulses, double the energy by recirculating it once. You put it into a ring, bleed it out over time, and now you have your high duty factor. Beam quality was not terrific, but you did get your high duty factor. Okay. In addition, it was a popular thing to do because MIT, University of Illinois, National Bureau of Standards, and ARGA all submitted proposals for the same thing. As a consequence, INSAC formed a panel, which Herman knows very well, he was on it, Bromley, headed by Bromley, to review these proposals. Okay, and the good news is you got to critique everybody's proposal. Everybody got it. The bad news is you had to respond to their critiques. Okay, and so there was about a 50-page addendum to the proposal which went over SURA's response to the critiques. Long story short, SURA won the competition and was chosen to build the machine, primarily because it met the 4-GeV requirements that the scientists wanted and was extendable up to 6. Okay. Because NEO has national and lab in it, it got changed to become CNAF. Okay. We're going to head towards superconducting, and let me just mention that superconducting was known even then. And in fact, a several GeV machine was tried to be built by using SRF technology at Stanford. Okay. Unfortunately, like many things that first tried, it missed the energy and the current by a factor of 10. Okay. So in '84, when there was a proposal by a fellow from SLAC to use superconducting RF, even though it was pulsed, so it was a little less risky, it didn't really provide the beam quality because it still had to use that ring business, and the reliability of the history of SRF made it unattractive. So Newport News site was chosen where we are today, and a conceptual design report was developed in '84. Okay, all based on this Linac pulse filter ring, which was used for winning the competition. But as many things in the world, we have technology challenges. The first people out of the box may fail, but that failure actually can lead to success. So people began to understand why the Stanford machines had issues. And in particular, there were people at Cornell, Ron Sunderland among them, who successfully tested 2 elliptical cavities in '84. Herman became director in '85. Somewhere in this picture, in the centroid, you'll see Herman. This was his staff in 1985. There's a fellow named Al Maschke, some of you may know, who made the pitch that we should consider using SRF to build the machine. Now, as I mentioned, there was a liability associated with it because the other project at Stanford had failed. On the other hand, Cornell had successfully tested 2 cavities. Right? So this put it on a new basis. So Ron Sunderland was mentioned by Al Maschke as people at Cornell being key. And so Christoph Lehman and I made a trip to Cornell in July and had a look-see and got information on what they were proposing. Now, so that was July. In August, we had information about how to recirculate a beam and what the cost might be. And so you could start looking at some of the parameter space. And in particular, you could see if you recirculated the beam multiple times, how much cost savings you could have. If you had different gradients, you could see how that affected the cost. You could look into the 10-year cost and see if there was any minimum. In other words, having the SR information from the original project and the Cornell data, you were able to get a sense of the parameter space. The short version of this is it looked plausible, right? Which meant that we could continue looking at more detail. In other words, if you're going to recirculate it, how many times, and should you split the Linac into multiple pieces, and how many pads should you have, etc. But importantly, the old room temperature design was not dropped. In fact, Roger Miller from SLAC was actually developing a better cavity, it was copper, approach, and he even had a phase 1 on how to get 4-JEV, and he laid out a phase 2 how to get 8-JEV. So it was still being continued along in parallel. So remember this, all the T=0 here is sort of July. As time went on, there were workshops and reviews, but they were increasingly starting to focus on the SRF solution. All right? That's when Claus comes in, because one of the technologies you need is cryogenics. So you go get experts, and Claus showed up for the first time as a part of a review in October of '85, looking at an element of an SRF design that had to do with the cryostat. There was beginning to get traction inside of DOE with the idea, and so then there was a directive to start looking and hiring experts in SRF and cryogenics, right, to support the idea. Therefore, Claus Rode became CBAF employee in February '86, in charge of cryogenics. So, not long after that, DOE approved conversion to SRF. Now, this is pretty amazing. I went through the dates that just hit me. We started July of the year before, and in less than a year, you converted from a copper design to an SRF design. So that's moving right along. So being one of the first big installations, you had to sort of invent nomenclature to describe what you were doing. And one of the issues was what element of the machine do you really need to prototype to say, okay, this is going to work? And the short version is, it was this thing we called a cryo unit, which is just 2 cavity pairs inside a cryostat. Because the rest of the machine, if you start putting several of them together, it's called a cryo module. If you could prove this worked, then you could prove that the design you were going to build was on firm ground. Okay, so from Cornell, we got the 5 cell cavities, there's 5 cells here, and the tuning mechanism, right? We were seeing these higher order modes, which I'll get to a little bit, which have to do with how well the machine will work. But this is all more or less imported from Cornell. All right. So that was the strength. We had started with a very strong base. Okay, but you still had R&D. One of the early photos show Peter Kneisel, also from Cornell, in what was euphemistically called a clean room in the high bay. Okay, you'll notice nobody has gowns on. You'll also notice there's just plastic, and you'll also notice this is plywood. So this is not class 100 clean. But I'm sure it was cleaner than the rest of the high bay. That I believe is true. So you start putting the cavity pairs together. This is a cryo modular test gate in the old building there. You have 4 cavity pairs together for this cryo module, and the RF feeds. You see the first cavity pair and the last cavity pair. You see the RF feeds. You don't see these because there was a steering from the RF feed, but if you put it in this pattern, then the beam trajectory sort of corrected itself. Okay, so that's why the pattern for the RF feeds exists. So what do you got? From the physics point of view, the nuclear physics point of view, they had less of an axe and more of a scalpel now. They had a nice instrument, essentially, that had a beam of high quality, and it was stable. And the reason was, because of SRF technology, you could afford to have the machine on all the time, so you could afford to accelerate the electrons all the time. In addition, even though SRF was very expensive, you could reduce the cost by recirculation. So the combination of those things made a viable approach. Okay, so what you end up with then are 2 Linac segments in this recirculated thing. In the first phase, we had 500 MeV and 4 passes. You work it out, that gives you 4 jets. Later, we increased it to 5 passes and dropped the energy of the Linac to 400 MeV, which gave you the same 4 jet. Okay. So I'll get to the impact of that on the next slide. The 4.8 kilowatt refrigerator, which is huge, and by those standards of that day, was led by Claus Rode. We also had a feature where we could simultaneously deliver beams to all the experimental areas, and the importance of that is productivity. So now you can have highly productive environment where you've got 3 experimental groups getting the results at the same time. So that if you look at the productivity of the lab as a function of dollars to operate it, it's very good. So you all seen this before. I'm going to only mention a couple of things. One is that the space here, the civil construction was set for the 500 MeV. Because the arcs, an additional arc was added, we only need 400 MeV Linac here, so that left space, as you'll hear later, that was put to good use. In addition, the arc radius here was set looking to the future. All right. In other words, if you how high an energy beam you can handle depends on this arc radius, and by making it gentle enough, that gives you future capability. And as you'll hear later, we were able to basically take it all the way up to 12 jet. So here's where we were near the time of I'm talking about. The most notable thing here is green. You'll see a lot of green space. And where that arrow is headed towards the interstate. And between that arrow and the interstate at that time was a dairy farm. Okay. Most of you know there's no dairy farm, or not so many trees. So one of the challenges of doing it, of course, you say let's do multiple passes, but you have to control the beam. And you can control the beam for the first pass, but the second, third, fourth, and fifth pass, you're going to get what you get. You have no knobs for that. The good news is that electron beams are high quality, and the better news is that the beam energy goes up, the quality actually improves, and so that even though it looks a little ugly here, rambling around, it works. Okay? Although it takes lots of magnets to go around, come out here, about 2,200 magnets. Now, this is a little known fact, okay? But the reason it worked is, how do I get this started? Claus helped with some early productivity. Now, you heard that he came from the Tevatron area, Fairmont, right? And so I think he was a little confused. He thought it was a collider. You'll see that those things are going against each other. Okay, that was all worked out. Anyway, so this is the first time I think he's publicly got credit for this. All right. So the other element of the design that was sort of a skeleton in the closet is I remember I told you that the Stanford design was the first out of the gate. And two issues. One, CBAP needed 200 microns and 5 passes to do the job. Okay? But the Stanford result was 40 times less current and 4 passes. It only gets worse at higher passes. Eventually it was discovered that this is caused by a thing called HOMs, and that if you make these HOMs smaller, the effect is less. And in fact, Cornell built a 5-cell SRF cavity where they damped these HOMs and achieved greater than 20 milliamps, which is 100 times over what CBAP needed. So this was a proof of principle that, in fact, here's the physics. If you do this, you'll get a good result and can achieve it, and this was demonstrated. But it's not the same. This was in a synchrotron ring. It's not the same as going around coming out here with CBAP. So you really need to do the simulations. And in fact, they built on old SLAC codes and did full simulations using the Cornell cavity damping. So then those modes were measured, the damping was measured, and how well they get damped was measured, and that was put into the code. The result was they estimated that it had a threshold at 20 milliamps, or 100 times what you needed. Now, the accuracy of these simulations is always the discussion, but, and you could argue they're only good with a factor of 10, but we have a factor of 100 here, so we're okay. All right. So one of the key elements, a 4.8 kilowatt refrigerator, was a challenge that was successfully met. As you can see, Claus is actually smiling there with his team and the Air Liquide engineers. And this was during the fall of '93 and the spring of '94 when they were commissioning the facility. Not a trivial enterprise, and in many ways, many firsts in the world associated with this enterprise. It was successful. Credit goes to Claus. So if I go back to Claus time, our cryogenic timeline, first cryogenic workshop starting on the SRF evaluation was in October of '85. That's when Claus first showed up to the lab. There was a conceptual design report in '86, the same time he hired on as a CBAP employee. He developed the specification for the vendors in '87. He got the contract out on the street and awarded a year later in '88. None of these are mean feats, by the way. These are big challenges. It's a huge enterprise. It's a difficult enterprise. It's a technical enterprise. It's not a cheap enterprise. And the number of people in the world that can do this is very small. So Claus, I think, delivered wonderfully. So the initial phase was at a little bit higher temperature, 4.5, and that was '91. Remember I told you in the previous slide, it was the fall of 93 or so, and spring of 94 when they were doing the commissioning, and they actually got 2.1K operation. That's what you needed in May of 94. Here's a picture of Claus giving a presentation to the Zurich Council of Presidents in that time frame. The short version is, and the success story here, the beam on target in 94. Okay. So certainly no small attribution to Claus. Okay, so shifting gears just a little bit. I'm at Michigan State, and they have a program where they use radioactive beams, and they've had it for a long time. In the 90s, they discovered that they would like every lab, they need to advance their capability to keep up with the science program. And so there was an idea of coupling the two existing cyclotrons together and building a bigger fragment separator so that you could have a factor of 100 to 100,000 increased capacity in these radioactive beams. Okay. What that required, because every one of these magnets here is driven by superconducting coil. So you need cryogenics. And the cryogenic capacity in the lab, given this new expansion, was inadequate. So it was an NSF-funded project, but we had technical reviews of the model on the layman temple. You can't imagine what I was thinking, but we had those kind of technical reviews, and for one of them, Armin was on the team, and he suggested that for this cryogenic expansion, we could get a hold of CBAF and take advantage, which means getting over Claus Rode. And he led the effort successfully on the years 99 to 2001, where he discovered a used refrigerator for us at the National Bureau of Mines, refurbished it, designed and built the new pieces that you need for the cold box and the cryogenic transfer line and purifier system, and implemented CBAF-like controls, and it was commissioned at MSU. All successful. Thank you, Claus. All right. So let me just finish. Remember, it's the little things that.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I failed to think about it on the first talk. We could take one or maybe two questions if there are any. Okay, thank you very much again, Richard. So the next speaker is Tony Chargan. He had his education at San Jose State University. 1967 was around about the time he completed. There's a little gap in his resume here until 1972 when he's shown at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He had a series of appointments in magnetic fusion engineering, but then he was here at CBAF as the Associate Director for Engineering and also the Project Manager for the CBAF construction from August 85 to 1989. He then went back to Livermore, but also took a further sabbatical in conjunction for 5 years with the spallation neutron source. So here again is somebody who's been moving around the Office of Science and has a good story to tell. Please welcome Tony Chargan.
In honor of Herman Grander, I thought I'd use 2 graphs. This is the first time it's been done in this auditorium. So we're full of firsts, Herman. Let me see if this will work. The difficult part is when we did it with plastic sheets, you could have a stack in the middle, you have a left and a right, you could do it real time. This one, you can't do it. You have to plan ahead of time. Do I remember the sequence of these are in? No. So this may end up being somewhat random, but I'll give it a shot. And that's for you. I think we all learn from you how to do these presentations. So the gap you're talking about, your assistant didn't pick up the fact that I didn't have a title. I was an engineer going to Superman after I got my master's degree, so maybe that wasn't so illustrative. But my first job was building a superconducting magnet in the shape of a seam on a baseball. My second job was building a 2-degree helium pump to pump neutral beams with, which is a fun way to do it. So when Beverly whispered in my ear before he even signed on, Herman is thinking about superconducting machine, I go, yay! So it was a done deal as far as I was concerned. But Richard showed you what we went through to get there, and it's appropriate I follow you because I followed you in this job here too. So it was kind of fun to do this. Oh no, I screwed up. The first one. Why does this one not work? The other one didn't work either. You worked in a dry run. I clicked it once, it didn't come back. So this sequence blew my mind. I wanted to do this chart first. It says, oh no, he's an engineer. The only engineer in the crowd, he's about to give a physics talk, right? Well, this is CBAF 2. The first chart, when I saw it, I walked into a conference room where Dirk Walechka was holding his classes for physics students in the area. This is uncredited courses that people attended anyway just because he was that well known and important in the community. So I walk in and I see this thing that says, this is CBAF. And it's got in this thing perfect penmanship, something I couldn't possibly understand. And then I walk in with my team, which was a bunch of engineers with blueprints and things like that, and you see a picture like this. Turns out this is CBAF 2. So I'll try to connect the two ends. And the way I'm going to connect it is, it's always about people. Okay? Nowadays, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, the word startup is a big deal. It wasn't necessarily in those days, or it wasn't unknown, but people didn't talk about startup as a career goal. Well, it turns out there are startups in the Office of Science as well. And I think Richard's model of MSU, I should put this thing, as you see it later on, I think it'll take me 5 minutes to draw every step that I'm about to describe here. That says, in fact, the business sequence that happens in Silicon Valley and around the country and the world actually happened here. And Herman led us through it. He may not have known these things as a descriptive step in the business world, but you were a master at each one of those steps. And one actually has to master them, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that. So, what are the stages? First, you need founders with a good idea. That's what Richard was part of. And they need some support. Family, friends, relatives, whatever. And in this case, it's UVA, William and Mary, and of course, Southeastern universities. They provided initial funding that Richard was working on before we got started here. And the next stage is something called angel funding. And the angels are people that have a lot of money they don't know what to do with, and they like the folks that are inventors, and so they invest in them. And maybe don't even understand the idea. And in this case, it's Commonwealth of Virginia and the City of Newport News. And then there is the third phase, which is venture capitalists. And these guys really want to make money, right? So they examine the heck out of everything, both people and ideas, And if you haven't failed at something, you can't get money from venture capital. Because they figure you haven't learned anything unless you failed at something. So the Heppel thing you talked about was a failure by most people's thoughts. In my world is, wow, we learned something. And so we built on it. Okay? So in DOE's system, the venture capital people, that's the Office of Science. Because they invest, and then if they win, they get to invest again. Okay, and the next one is, in this case, is Office of Division of Nuclear Physics, and I have to add the field office as well. Because as you go from left to right, they're progressively more risk averse as you get from left to right. Since Richard saved me a little time, I'll add the story to it. We were about a year into the superconducting machine. The Oak Ridge Operations Office retained the conventional facilities contract for the old machine. We were already running our own superconducting machine. The contract for the conventional facilities for the old machine, a year later, was continued by Oak Ridge just because they thought, well, these guys might come back. That's the conservative approach. You can go both ways. Well, it cost us a bunch of money, but it's a separate story. So this phase is the biggest leap of faith, has longest odds of success. Lots of people fail at this place, right, at the SC level, and therefore it's most critically examined. And the last phase is initial public offering. And that's when if you're in the business world, you've succeeded, you go out and try and sell the company and make a lot of money. In the our sector, that's elected officials. It's Congress, administration, and by extension, congressional staff and OMB. And this is where the people part comes in. This is where Herman excelled over any other person in that business that you might think of, at least in that time frame. So I learned a lot about that phase from him. However, there is a huge difference. The biggest one being that once you're in business as a company, the value of the company is established by the investors. And that's self-evident. So how is the value established in the federal business? Well, in federal business, that value is established by peer review system. And they're the ones that figure out whether this company, this project, is moving along at the appropriate pace that it should continue the funding. So those are all peer reviews, originally known as Temple Layman and now Better, and of course they're preceded by NSAC on a long-term basis. But these guys do this every 6 months or so, biannually. So the first thing we had to do, and Richard already explained this, so I don't need to go too much through this thing except to say that the choice was not all that courageous. Most people thought it was risky. It was only courageous politically. Technically, to me, it was obvious. I took my family to Smithsonian Institute, museum I should say, for Thanksgiving in the fall of '85. And it turns out in the History Museum, American history, there's an accelerator exhibit. My 7-year-old daughter says, "Dad, when is your accelerator going to be here?" I said, 25 years from now. I go around the corner, there's a Heppel cavity. It's already in the Smithsonian. I'm thinking, this can't be that hard. And as Richard explained, you know, the technology improved, and we in fact were successful at doing it. So, the issue just had to do with the phases that I described earlier. Can you run the project through all those 4 phases? The technically part what happened is that all the technologies were individually proven. What hadn't been done is the on a large scale that we were about to embark on. So Cornell did it, this size. Now we're going to do this over a mile or whatever. So Master was mentioned here, so I found this picture, Richard. So it wasn't just a phone call, he came here to agitate. Okay? And the reason I took this picture, it wasn't just him. There's a guy here too. Where are you, George? He ended up here. So George Neal is here. Of course, Christoph Lehman is listening intently. And so he's at Tillis, and I'm already erasing. And I can just pretend that I was erasing the copper machine. We're ready to go super right now. Turns out, another thing I learned from Herman, people count at every level in all areas. So this is talk to technical people mostly, but without the support of everybody else that was on the site, we would have been nowhere. So I thought about it, and there's dozens of names I could list. And I'm going to start out with Joe Finn. Those of you that were here, because years ago, know that he was our HR guy. And all I can tell you is I interviewed a person on a Wednesday morning. That person started Wednesday afternoon. So this was Judd Kirby. I said, putting our project control. I said, Judd, when can you start? He said, well, I can start today. I said, let me see what I can do about it. Hey, Joe, can we do this? Sure enough. Judge rolled up his sleeves. He was punching at the computer that afternoon. That has not happened. Okay? So we had this superb help. And Gene Bisonius, there are a lot of stories about him. But Herman and I learned that we both worked with him, and I won't go into the detail how we got there. But he taught us all what it meant to buy well, which basically means you do best value evaluated procurements and you don't settle for low bid, which is the rumor in the community, you always have to buy low bid. Absolutely not true. If you know the rules, just get a good procurement guy, he'll teach you. If you want to cheat a little bit, don't tell anybody. If you want to cheat a lot, get a procurement guy. And I didn't know how to pick any names among the administrative staff, but I think that group of people that we had working for us just did an incredible job. The number of reviews that we were able to pull off, one after another, it's not just the content, but it had to be presentable. Now, how do you do this? You do this with talented folks on the administrative side. And the only illustration I can give you in the dedication is that Temple and Lehman were running a competition with the SSC site. There were 35 proposals from 35 state proposals. Ed tells me that it came by truck, right? They asked for help. This is Thanksgiving holidays. They want help. It's our staff. So we went up to Washington and helped them navigate through that morass of paper. You remember that, right? Now I forgot whether I'm going to left or right. So I'll put them both up. Okay. Back to people. This is a real chart that I got from the budget office. I'm not sure you can read this, but it goes to 1985 from the beginning of time. We were hiring at the rate of 8 years, at the rate of 5 FTEs per month. In this year, which is the first year of construction, 1987, there were 2 per week. I bet you there isn't a lab that does that. When I left here, I went to the mechanical engineering department, which was running, there's like 1,700 people. We probably had like 6 people within the mechanical engineering department doing HR. And there's a whole new different HR department within the lab itself. We couldn't do this. I'll tell you that for sure. We would interview like 10 people to get one. Here, I don't know that we have to interview 1.5 to get one. Because we knew who we wanted, and they all wanted to come. The other interesting thing is, I knew that we had a lot of people that were going to school while they were working with us really hard. So the only data I could get is from folks that are still on the staff here, which is in 2016. Of those that are still here, which is 30 years later, 7 got masters, 18 got bachelor's degrees, and 6 got associates. You could probably double that if you include those that left. So I think that's an incredible influence on the people in the community. So people joined to be part of this exciting startup. That's what drove it. It wasn't for the faint of heart. Our friend Art Steeson, on one of our early reviews on spectrometers, came up with this thing that I was quoted. I didn't have it, I got it from one of my friends here. He says, I'm surprised you can even design magnets like you show. These are spectrometer magnets. No one will bid on those magnets. And if anyone bids on it, you will not be able to afford them. And if someone bids and wins, they won't work anyway.
Tony, maybe not everybody knows who Art Steeson is.
Do I really want to go into detail? He's a physicist from Los Alamos, but go ahead, go ahead.
You've done what I asked.
He's a reputable member of the community. Maybe. After this thing, maybe not. So nevertheless, despite those kinds of evaluations, people with extraordinary talent joined us from long distances, France, Germany, La Jolla. That was my biggest hire. If I could get somebody from La Jolla to come to Newport News, that was a big deal. These are huge magnets. Well, they're big. 500, 600 tons, 1,500 tons of shielding. And these spectrometers are in 3 halls, and they've been taking data for years. Just to prove that they exist, there's Hall A, there's Hall B, there's Hall C. Now, the other interesting thing is, this is one of the other phases, angels at work. So, Richard talked about the inventors, what I call founders in this context. The next phase is angels. How do you survive? Well, the city of Newport News was pretty darn helpful. This is actually not the only check they wrote. I found out while I was going through this thing that they spent another $1.1 million before this, also for land. So probably a total of $3.4 million. For a little city, that's a big deal. And not only that, but the deal was made by the previous mayor. And I remember us panicking that here's a new mayor, a new election, what's going to happen? And Herman went to see Mayor Rackley, and she says, the deal is the deal. And she delivered the check. Of course, that's all Triple Peace that accepts the check. And the next stage is their land is donated by the city to Sura, and Sura in turn gives it to, this is site office representative DOE, Ron Holgren. Of course, Christoph Lehman is there, and that's me, and Jim Coleman, and Dirk Waleczka, and Herman. And of course, with groundbreaking, everybody shows up, right? So all phases of the project are there. The founders are there, Dana Hamill from Sura, Herman, the angels are there, that's the mayor, Radley, Al Triple Peace from Venture Capital, and the stockholder, this is the first time I mention it, is Congressman Bateman, who is vital in making sure that the project moves on. So, all these phases require talented people everywhere. We were really confused in September of 1985 because we had a note from BNP that says, we're jeopardizing the project. I actually think the language was stronger than that, but I can't lay my hands on the letter. If you change the technology. On the other hand, Herman got someone in this SC, I think he was Wallenmeyer, to say, well, you can continue studying. I don't think you authorized it. I think what really happened is that temple wasn't confused. He said, look, if you guys want to do this, and for real, these are the hoops you got to jump through. And so he invented Science and Technology Review and Preliminary Design Review. If you pass those, you'll be in the budget by Christmas. The budget actually is already written in September, but somehow he wasn't going to get the 3 months leeway for us. So you either perform or not. So it was a do or die kind of thing. So these are not the only 2 reviews. As Richard already mentioned, we had a number of design reviews because in order to get ready for reviews 2, we had to prepare the material that would pass the examination of all the other people that were in the community. So a whole bunch of people participated. I counted a number of people in that picture Richard had. There were 56 people. In, was it September of 85, October 85? Of those 56 people, I would say 25 at least are administrators. So of the total technical staff, engineers, technicians, designers, probably in order of 20, 25. So there's no way we could do this by ourselves. So we got help from the community. This is where Claus came in the fall of 85 and helped us get through it. And we did it. On the investor side, which is the final stage, and in our case, in my definition, that includes Congress and administration and Office of Management Budget. And I don't have, there is a permanent interaction with these people as well, but I don't have anything on that subject. It gets too long and detailed. However, let me just illustrate how one interacts with these folks. So Hunter Spillane, who was the head of the House Appropriations Committee at the time, he came to visit us. And this is not the exact quote, because the exact quote has a 4-letter word in it that I don't want to use. It says, I don't know what you guys do, but I know it's good. I was on the ship to Japan in 1945 when they told us to make our will since 90% of us aren't coming back. Well, I'm still here because of what you guys do, so I support you. So that's what nuclear science meant to him. It wasn't the first view graph that I showed. To him, it was life-saving. That's something to keep in mind. And I'll actually come back to it. Remember Hunter Spillane's name. Okay, we're in business of trying to pass those reviews. And so this is careful stuff now for the next couple of years. So we invented a 2-dimensional work breakdown structure. What that means that if you read along this side, that's what we're here to. You read the level 2, which is this guy here. It shows machine technology components, so accelerator, transfer lines, RF system, power, DC, and so on, controls, cryogenics, and so on. Each of the machines, copper and superconducting, had this technology in it, including cryogenics. Not to the same scale as superconducting. And of course, these are machine sectors, linear accuracy, link, and so on. So we could add this way or that way and compare two machines pretty easily. Or compare one design to another. Number of recirculations, for example, came out of here. The first setup was 3. They lasted about a week. 4 probably lasted a year or so. And we got the 5th one because we're running out of money. It was harder than physics, easier than engineering. So what I'm going to do is underline some of these big ones and maybe cover a few examples as I go through it. The Rich already showed you this thing, but this may be a little bit more impressive. There's literally nothing there. That's the land outline of Sura around 1983. So there's a Park building, and Threl, or Mark site. I should have put this one in the head. This is just to show we actually have project management tools. Remember the guy that started on Wednesday afternoon? First week I was around, that's the guy. So we could do earned value system before anybody asked us. We did earned value system with obligations, which is novel, nobody's repeated since. I'm advertising it on purpose, if everybody knows. Richard already showed this slide. I didn't know we were going to duplicate it, but so what? All that means is, oops, from this thing, we're giving it some life, to something like this, where there it is. It's just amazing transformation in the community, just visually speaking. I'm not going to go through the details. I'll point out, I think you'll hear more about this part later on. So, one of the things that David Henry couldn't live with is that we had multiple critical paths. I said, you know, it's a crown module, it's a conventional facilities, it's everything else. How can you do that? Something's critical path. And the reason everything was a critical path, because I took the money away from anybody that was ahead. And give it the money that was people that were behind. So we all finished at the same time. But, in reality, crown modules were the critical technology item, therefore they would be critical path. So I'm very happy to concede. So we built two crown module parallel lines. They were developed by Tom Mann and Bill Schneider. 4 crown unit lines to feed into those two. We bought the cavities from industry through evaluated procurement for Gene Usonias, as I said. Cavities were processed by Peter Kneisel. There were a number of SRF components, HOM loads, windows, and so on, that SRF group continued to develop and deliver to production line. And in turn, these production lines were fed by other equipment like vacuum tanks, flanges, helium tanks, whatever. They were bought from several industrial suppliers. There were some initial difficulties about vacuum leaks and so on, but developing detailed assembly and testing procedures finally yielded quality product at the required production rate, which was 2 crown modules per month. The punchline of that whole enterprise is that nowadays, the JLab SRF team is the center of excellence for the country, and in fact, delivers support to a number of science progress projects around the world. And it started with interaction with Cornell. You can see Ryder truck, that's the only thing I'm showing you. We had our own staff driving parts from Cornell because we wouldn't trust the shippers. The first cavity that came to the CBAP was Tom Moore and I carried on the plane. This is for exhibit, not for production. We just needed something here that said this is a cavity. We bought a seat for it on the airplane. It was sitting between us. So these are the 4 cryo-unit areas, and some of the key players in here: Frank Humphrey Sr., Tom Mann, Peter Kneisel, Jim Parkinson, Brian Carpenter. And this is, Greg Lewis was the first cryo module that was assembled from all the parts that were around. There's Sunderland with a tie. Must be he did a lot more work now. There's the first prototype. There's Charlie Hughes. He's the welder, left-handed, key part. There's a vacuum leak you can get to. Left-handed welder with a mirror gets to fix it. So Charlie is the hero for guys like Tom Mann and Bill Schneider. Of course, the crown modules ended up, as Richard already explained, in the tunnel, and that was just fine. Now, for the SRF work, we needed the world's largest 2-degree system. At that point in time, commissioned 1988, Torres Supra, the magnetic fusion machine, is 1.8 K system in France, delivered 15 kilograms per second at 300 watts. Our liquefier, 2K, 237 grams, for 800 watts. Huge step between what was existing and what we were trying to do. So first we recruited Claus and then Bill. Herman knew Claus first before I knew him. I knew Bill Promise before Herman knew him. And so it was, which one are we going to get? I said, Herman, we're going to get both. So we got two guys that built the two biggest helium systems in the country to work with us. So the excellence of the team just grew from there. And they in turn got people that are huge contributors. The big deal there is running whole compressors in series at something like 40,000 RPM at these cold temperatures. So the control system for that was a key to cold frame, establish the stability for it. So something called electronic gearbox is what the team developed to finally control the flow rate. The system was industry built, but they couldn't make it work. It was with the helpers of the
Says 5.
I'm going by the absolute number. Okay. So this expertise is now known worldwide. With Rare Gunny being one of the key members. There is the CHL. Of course, what we did, we actually built a submarine because the water level is way above the tunnel. So you start with a pad, build concrete on it, and you put some more waterproofing. You keep the water out of the tunnel. There's a pipe here with a whole bunch of pipes with pumps that are pumping water out of here. Those are recirculating magnets. This is a big invention in the conventional facilities, which is water tanks. What water tank technology used to build the end stations. Of course, here the water pressure is outside as opposed to inside. The big highlight on the electrical side is 1 Klystron per cavity. That's not been replicated more in one place. And allowed 6-channel operation. Full level RF, CPU, eliminating analog system, tweaking, and outreach to the control room. It was the first place where we had personnel safety system that ran on software, more reliable than hardware. And then eventually this graphics interface system used to program control to be replaced by graphics. There are the Klystrons. There are 5 kilowatts, 350 of them, 100 of them are still running, 25 years later, averaging 200 hours, and they're spec at 25,000 hours.
The guarantee was $300.
1,000.
The guarantee on those tubes was $300 in the contract.
Well, but the spec was 25,000.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, the point is, these are low-power devices as opposed to big 100 kilowatt or 200 kilowatt Klystrons that burn up. At low power like this, they can last a long time. Just like your 40-watt light bulb lasts a lot longer than your 200-watt light bulb. And then I just want to point this out because we are in this building. And why am I showing this? Well, the same architect that built the Fermilab, the Praying Hands building, designed this one. And if you think about it in 3 dimensions, it has the same principle behind it. The central meeting area and the spokes that go outside. In our case, they go outside horizontally. In Fermilab case, they go up vertically. But in principle, it's the same thing. So the only reason for showing this is it says, hey, we allow for upgrades, which is addition. This is supposed to have 8 spokes. Well, new team, new design. There's the addition. It didn't go as planned, but we allowed the possibility. That's the whole point I'm trying to make when it comes to all those 4 stages I'm talking about. If you allow growth, it'll happen. So, there is science in here. There's a tremendous progress in understanding atomic nuclei. A third of the PhDs in the US had to do with CBAT. There's a huge stimulated advance in science in the Southeast. But in the terms of Hunter Spillen's type of understanding of science, the detector group developed gamma camera for better breast cancer detection. Steady lines again, how about that? So everybody got what they needed. Founders got their vision implemented. Angels got better educated people, increased tax base. Venture capital people, Office of Science, mission well accomplished. Therefore, more investment opportunities, new projects to fund. And of course, the taxpayers got the ultimate benefit. And so, in the end, I would hope that this kind of roadmap is helpful in getting to the next step. Groundwork is set up for another one. Good luck with J-Light.
So you can take your 2 minutes to say what you wanted to say about Ernie.
So, I asked Juan if find out in enough time. So, Ernie Moniz came to visit us for an invitation from a brother, and we had one of these investors with us. Hunter Spillen wasn't here, but his team was here, about 2 guys. And we knew who we were talking to, so we prepared view graphs that would talk to normal human beings that understand some physics, but not a heck of a lot. And we had a good time with him. So he comes early, he didn't listen to any of it. He comes in late. He comes in about 11 o'clock, he's on like 5 minutes later. He gets up, starts giving nuclear physics talk, and one of these guys, or 2 of them, I don't remember which one, waves, he says, Dr. Moniz, you lost me when you said good morning. And I'm sitting next to Franz Gross, and I said, what this guy needs is my Rotary Club view graphs. And Franz says, give it to him. I says, not me. I'm going to give it to you. You give it to him. So Herman calls for a break. We have a coffee break. We assemble. So during coffee break, Franz gives Ernie the talk. And he had never seen it. But it sort of makes sense when you prepare a talk for an audience like that. He gave a beautiful talk. People were smiling. The 2 guys that came to visit from Congress, they're happy because they now understood stuff that they couldn't possibly understand before. So he figures he's got him. He says, okay, now let me tell you about electron spin. Sit down, Ernie.
Okay, we take 5 minutes, please. Okay, we've got a plan that for people to talk, they can also have alcohol, but that plan doesn't start till these talks are finished. So let's move on. So we've got a little change of generations here. So Norman Holtkamp got his master's degree from the University of Berlin and then a PhD at Technical University in Darmstadt. He was working at DAISY and Linux, and the story goes, that he was working on warm Linux, and of course his boss Bjorn Vik much preferred cold Linux, and so Norbert left, and then he was at Fermilab, and then he went to Oak Ridge, where of course he fell in love with cold Linux, and of course helped to build it for SNS. He then went to Cadarache to work on ITER, and I'm not sure whether you'd say he found the error of his ways, but he came back to the States and is now the Deputy Director of the staff, Norbert Holtkamp.
Not only that, I'm finally a US citizen since February 2016. In spite of every attempt of my old friends to prevent it. So I'd like to talk and begin a little bit to tell you about the spallation neutron source. And first of all, let me thank you, Dumont, and I guess Claus, you probably approved the program for me actually being able to speak here. It's a real honor, and it's really fun to talk about the common history that we share. I want to take those that are not so familiar with SNS on a quick journey on what this really is about and what connected the two laboratories, JLab and Oak Ridge, in a much larger collaboration that's actually listed down here, 6 national laboratories trying to do something. And I want to take all of us on a little tour d'amusement on some of the memorable moments that a few of us here, especially in the front of the second row, share. It's quite a bit of fun. So it's a 7-year journey that we're going to go through. But before we go to that, I actually want to point out that I share a hobby with Claus that nobody, I'm surprised, yet talked about. I started to get to know Claus as a real, solid sailor. And him being, on the water and talking about his boat all the time too. So I'm not sure whether you ever did this, Claus, but I did a tour last year, all the way from Newport, Rhode Island to the Azores. That was quite impressive. So if you haven't done it yet, I can only recommend it for your retirement. You see the boat here, it's a 46-foot Macara. The name is Morris. Very nice boat. You can be sure that if you go on the 40th latitude, which is what we did, you will have one storm at least. So this is a picture towards the back of the boat. It's hard to see, but that's about a 30-foot wave rolling under the boat. So that's about half the height of the mast on the thing, but it's also very beautiful. So anyway, very nice hobby, and I hope you enjoy it. So what did SNS try to achieve scientifically? This is a kind of a history plot that we showed for a long time. It's even out of date. There's other things on there right now, like the European spallation source and stuff like that. But beginning with Chadwick, the discovery of the neutron itself very soon became a tool for material science, and very soon reactors were used as a sources of neutrons, very intense sources of neutrons. But reactors have an intrinsic limit. It has to do with the cooling of the core and the number of neutrons per square centimeter that can be used. So all these names, these acronyms are really reactors. While accelerators became the basic source of a pulsed, intense neutron to do science. Now, this is at the basis of a proposal to build such an intense source at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. In fact, Oak Ridge National Laboratory did have a reactor already, had a neutron program, but Oak Ridge had no idea, no competence really in building accelerators. So we'll talk about that a little bit and the kind of, probably the new way of doing accelerators. So this is a picture that I pulled off the web yesterday, and what it shows is the performance of the facility actually. It's online. The facility is supposed to produce about 1 megawatt, 1.4 megawatt of beam power, which is actually done. This is a measurement of how many neutrons per day or per unit time the facility can produce, and this is essentially counting all the way up, and then this is the integral. So this is basically the reliability. This thing really runs, when it's on, 99.9% during the day as a maintenance, like many of our accelerators, period, and integrates science as it goes along, and does it every day essentially, and it's working really, really well. So I come back to that a little bit later. Many people have shown pictures of trees. So there's another one. There's also trees in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, or there were trees in Oak Ridge, Tennessee at some point in time. And like many of these big mega science projects, this started in the woods in many ways. So I also want to relate a little bit more to Claus. So Claus is somebody, and I just figured that out when I tried to prepare this talk. I went back to my friends in Oak Ridge, but we had a very, very good communications department, and they would take pictures and doing every review, and there were plenty of reviews and pictures from all of us from the team. And I said, can you give me a couple of pictures of Claus? And so they went away and rummaged through the pictures. They couldn't find a single picture of Claus. And that's coming back to his management style, which is actually very impressive. So then I thought, what everybody does today, you go on Google, because everybody today is either on Facebook or LinkedIn or some pictures, right, on there. Even Dan Lehman is on LinkedIn, or at Temple, or Tony. But there's no Claus. These are actually the only two pictures that you can find from Claus on the internet. And I really tried hard. That also is an attribute to his management style, because he's really kind of like a stealth bomber. He's undercover, and he's very effective. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about that too. Also, you can see Claus likes ties, right? Usually red ones. But I have also seen him in blue and yellow, mostly with anchors on it, or ships, or something that has to do with like today, right? Or you get them for free from the yacht club or something. I don't know. Anyway, at least he showed up with a tie. It's not like the West Coast. When I came to Stanford to select first, people came in t-shirts and jogging pants. Kind of do deal review. So this is about the year of 2001, the spring of 2001. That's about the time, or maybe a year, not quite a year later, after JLab joined this project. And it was a really interesting time because, like many of the projects you've heard here before, it's kind of a story of transitioning from an old-style, normal conducting, conservative approach to a probably very aggressive at that point and very bold step to propose a superconducting system, a LINAC in this case, that today provides the basis and the heart of the facility, which is extremely flexible, is expandable, it provides room and space for build-out, like Tony mentioned, and it does lead today the technology in neutron spallation sources and in superconducting high-power proton limits, and I'll come back to that a little bit too. So it's about the time, but it wasn't quite there yet. So again, it's a story about stealth. There was a small team of people working to convert the original proposal that had a normal conducting LINAC into superconducting one. It wasn't anywhere at the beginning, more than an idea, and very, very quickly, within a year, turned over the year of 2000 into a real plan. And what I'm showing is essentially now, and I really like this slide, is a little bit a different way of doing projects. First of all, there was an expertise in Oak Ridge, that's part of the problem. But there was also really the idea at the end that maybe you don't have to do what Tony talked about, namely hire 4 people a week and build up a whole project management team. Maybe a better way to do this is to go back to a system of 16 national laboratories and seek the expertise where it is and try to have everybody build what he's good at and then integrate it in the central place. So this is a story about SNS. Of course, that's a positive story about SNS. There's politics behind it and all that. So we'll come back to that a little bit too. So the story really is, so this is SNS, this is the LINAC here, the LINAC accelerator, bio plant. I kind of, try to roughly point out, who does what. So Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory built injector, about 20 million. Located the accumulator ring and a bunch of beam lines, about 130 million. Oak Ridge built the target, which is still the performance limiting system as of today. It's not the lean accelerator. The accelerators go much, much further than design. Los Alamos and Jefferson Lab ultimately, after the design change was done, shared the construction of the LINAC. Los Alamos building the normal connecting piece and the other systems, about $170 million. And then Jefferson Laboratory, approximately $70 million. And I say approximately because that's not quite correct. It was actually more like $65 million. But when I came back about 2-3 years ago and I started talking to Mont about the superconducting project that we have today at SLAC, also superconducting LINAC, he kind of pointed out that when he became a director, people at JLab explained to him that I still owe him $5 million. And that the laboratory was unfairly treated by the Oak Ridge management, and therefore I'm supposed to bring a check first, which of course I did. Well, I brought a big check, but not for that. It's kind of if you look at the landscape, it's really the laboratories all over the country that delivered it from the total scope. And now you're familiar, right? Like Tony gave us an introduction on the basics of project management, WBSs and level 2 accounting here. You're familiar with the accounting now. About half of the total cost of the construction of this facility was accelerators, and Jefferson had probably, I would say at this point, the most important piece to deliver for a relatively, I would say, modest amount of money compared to the others. At the peak of construction, about 500 people worked on this, and whatever more than about 150, 160 people at Oak Ridge. So that was distributed over the country. Something else I want to do today, and Claus, I'm sure, remembers this vividly because it was actually that team that brought him on board, is what I talked about before. It was a normal conducting LINAC, and it's to the attributes of, from my point of view, the Office of Science, that many people always say, the government is slow, government, you can't do anything, the government can't do this, can't do that. You had at least 3 stories today, right, where within a year or 2, basically, the conceptual design of a large science project that turned upside down, and the government, the administration, when it supported it, it was possible and it was done in a very small period of time. Whenever somebody comes to me and says that, I give them these 3 examples, and they're really very, very good examples. So this is kind of the old design, normal conducting LINAC, 2 rings. All of this was basically, like we call baseline. It was frozen, if you want to. But then there was a small team of people, and I want to mention them here that said this is not the right decision. So I was actually, one of them is here today at Temple. The team that was brought in was in 1998. came here with a whole bunch of people, a group of people, very dedicated, more than others, Tony among them, Tom Mann. I think many people knew one form or the other at some point were there, and turned this around. So thanks to them for doing this. But the lesson learned is in science, we have to be bold if we want to make good decisions, good designs, and advance the physics and advance the science. So don't be always conservative. Be bold when necessary, and think about when necessary is. That also, mentioning these teams brings back, the kind of the lessons learned I learned, and many of us kind of indicated it, but I think they have really phrased it. In large science projects, there's always, team that has the idea, right? So team of people that comes and says, we really should do this. This is exciting. This is good science. And what they do is they develop the idea and they do the initial layout, right? They convince the politicians, like Tony talked about, and then they leave out the details, right? Like the cost and all that, all this unimportant stuff. And usually that leads to a new team, right? Very quickly. Dan Lehman actually used to have a certain number of people, that everybody knew if he would come with that team to a review, it was clear that the director would walk out the door and never come back. The henchman or something. Then there's a team, and I think that's really, in my example here for SNS, that was Adam and David and Yang. The people that really, try to take this vision and make it real. Put a WBS around it and talk about money. So they set up the organization, they finish the design, they get the money, they baseline the project. Unfortunately, in this process, going from the imaginary to the real axis, most of the scientists realize they can get only half the science done, and the politicians and the stakeholders realize they have to pay twice as much, which usually leads to the fact that there's a new team. And then, and Claus, and I think that's also a tribute for many of us here, but it's a kind of a dying generation of people that have the honor and the pleasure to be part of Team 3, which actually then is allowed to execute it and actually build all that fun stuff and get going. And then after that, there's also a new team because it's people that do operations, and usually people that like fast-paced construction are not good at it. So it's time to leave. So in spring of 2006, then actually this thing was delivered, and it turned out that Claus and I, many others here, were part of Team 3, which is the most rewarding part of such a project. And Janet's contribution under Klaus's leadership would deliver, and has delivered, a new generation of high-power proton Linux that I think today sets the stage for what other people do, and is still leading, from my point of view, for at least another 5 to 10 years compared to other projects going on at the moment. Of course, when you deliver something like this, and I think we both figured this out recently, because it was a 10-year anniversary party at SNS, and we weren't invited for you. Of course, that's the other thing, in inauguration, you showed the thing when the project starts, right? But in inauguration, I realized, at least I was invited for the inauguration, but of SNS. The first 2 rows, the people in the first 2 rows when this ceremony happened, I wouldn't realize probably, I wouldn't know 80% of the people, which is probably my ignorance, but nevertheless. So what did JLab have to deliver? You have seen many of these pictures. Those who know the stuff, know what this is, and those who don't, you probably don't have to. It's just big stuff. It's a cryo plant, and it's complicated, and it's a combination of technical design and procurement. All of this has to be done well, and Tony talked about that. But this is really the heart of the development, and the new accelerator. There's a picture of the tunnel here, and the installation in Oak Ridge. 33 low beta cavities and 48 high beta cavities, 23 cryo modules with a pretty high gradient for that stage. Today people would kind of laugh about this. at least a factor of 2 or so better in gradient as well as in Q. But back then it was quite a stretch of technology, and people were very suspicious about us delivering. Of course, this was the final design. When I first was implemented into the SNS baseline, first thing people found out they couldn't afford it. So it was de-scoped, and in the sense that less cryo modules could be built, but with the same performance. So that's another interesting story. Getting good people, engineers and scientists together, and forcing them to perform better drives R&D faster than anything else. Because failure leads to team 4. Anyway, so that drove a real aggressive R&D program, and it was good. So things, from that perspective, all was great. So let me talk a little bit about stories behind this. So of course, when you have a big organization like this, with multiple laboratories, you have to show organization charts. This is the one we always have to show in the reviews, and of course you can read it, so don't even try. And I'm not expected to do it. I often didn't do it. And the reason is that during the original tumultuous times of these projects, so this is actually Claus and JLab. Then there is Berkeley. There is Los Alamos. I think this is Brookhaven, and Argonne. Even I couldn't after 6 months remember, the names up here anymore, because we had laboratories that within 3 years changed the senior team leader 6 times, right? 6 times. So, that's to Klaus's tribute. He stayed in this box, from day 1 all the way to the end, and he delivered. So there were other stories about, I won't talk about the SDLs and the changing of the senior team leaders anymore, but we had meetings where the Brookhaven team leader would deliver yelling matches with the senior management. It was just exciting. And nevertheless, Klaus will always be there, gentleman, right? Calm, professional, straight like a German oak. Just walk in, go straight to the desk, and give a high quality, cost schedule performance talk, crystal clean presentation, and lead a very competent team. Now the other thing about Klaus is, and I'm surprised that somebody indicated this here, but Klaus is very straight. You ask Klaus a question, you get an answer. One answer, not more, short. So, if you want something from Klaus, say, Klaus, can we do this? No. Next day you come again, right? So Klaus, can we do this? Not possible. That's already a long conversation. The third day, actually, you would ask him the same question, and Klaus would say, maybe. And then actually things would change. But it took a while, to kind of get him from this, which is a strength and not a weakness, but something to deal with. And we went through that. Anyway, big organizations like this come with a lot of overhead and individuals that people have to deal with. And, luckily, I was here, right? But then there's a little bit of the background story, right? Failure is not an option on a big project like this. It's just all about, and I learned a little bit of this about this, about keeping the end game in mind and going there. But we had disasters all over the place. So I just mentioned a few to you, or those who were there: the ion source antenna, the drift tubular neck, the low level RF, the RFQ frequency jump, the ring diagnostics, and I have to say that some people, that's usual in a big project. Things happen. And that's okay. A good team can always compensate for a lot of things. The problem is, there's not always a team is a team. There's some people, pushing in one direction, and some in the other. And we had, internal sentinels and external sentinels, that kind of tried to derail us. And some tried really hard from the inside and from the outside. And so having risks brings automatically failures and compensation and techniques. But if the team doesn't pull together, it's a real problem. And we had this, several times, and I'm sure Claus remembers these tumultuous reviews that we had, when that happened, and some of them enjoyable. But also JLab wasn't always all green. It was kind of funny, as the laboratories delivered over time. Every lab had this kind of a spotlight. So every 6 to 12 months was another laboratory that kind of, got hit. First it was Berkeley because they delivered the source, right? So every sit around the table, there's 5 lab directors, yelling at one lab director why he's not delivering. And then, of course, that lab director plus the other 4 are happy to deliver the same service 6 months later when the other laboratory is on, and then so it goes around the table. So this time it was JLabs. So the production of the cryo module was on. I'm sure you remember that, Klaus, right? And a couple of people here remember that. This was a performance spec, and while some of the other labs and some of the other things really intentionally, not intentionally, but really a little bit recklessly screwed up, to be frank. I was always impressed with the performance here at JLab. Nevertheless, it was a new technology. It had risk, and it didn't perform straight. It didn't work all the time. You can see this, kind of periodic. That has nothing to do with vacation times or anything. This is just, technology. And we wanted, of course, this performance, and this was back, and a lot of them didn't perform. So now comes the story about, and I'm not sure whether Klaus was on the phone call, but Christoph was on the phone call. Remember that phone call, Christoph?
Oh, yes.
With Ray Orbach?
With Ray.
Yes. So let me talk about the phone call with Ray Orbach and the story that led to the weekly reports. And were you in the phone call too, Klaus? Probably you were. You must have been. Anyway, so let me tell you first of all, those who don't know who Ray Orbach is. From March 2002 until mid-2009, Ray Orbach was the director of the Office of Science at the Department of Energy, and it made him the highest-ranking science policy administrator within the DOE. So he's approximately responsible for $15–20 billion or something, somewhere in that range. And this story has to stay in the room because if you ever tell this to Ray, I'm going to get a big trouble. So that's also Dennis, don't do that, right? So somehow this performance of the cryo modules got the attention of Ray Orbach, and Ray was excitable. He was very engaged, and while some of the other laboratories really, was really good, was not a good story. Actually, JLab's story was a good story. So there was an insistence on a telephone conference, and Ray Orbach was on the phone. I think Dan was on the phone, and Klaus, and Christoph, and of course the Oak Ridge people and myself. And back then I was still definitely German, so the good thing about this is, right, SNS at some point was all run by foreigners. There was a Croatian, that's you, right? So it was Tom Mason, was a Canadian, and German, right, and then a Brit. Because it was such a hot potato that any sensible American wouldn't take the job. So we had this telephone conference, and Ray just started, complaining about the performance of JLab, not doing this and not doing that. And and nobody said anything, obviously, because he's a big guy, right? Everybody knew, I didn't. So at the end, I got pretty mad, and I just, I was young, right? So I said, well, okay, if you really want to know exactly every week what's going on, we'll make a weekly report that a person with a 5-minute attention span can actually listen to. Suddenly got really quiet on the phone. And this was the basis of the weekly reports. How long did we do this? I don't know, 2 years or something?
But I had previous training during the construction of CBAT. I wrote for about half a year weekly report, bi-weekly reports to Will.
Yeah. Anyway, it was something. Klaus had to do that, and that's fine. So this is a little bit of story of what really happened on the project from the beginning to the end, and it kind of shows what the original baseline was and what we planned to do in terms of installing the different pieces of the project. and then what actually happened and how the time shifted. In time, you see big shift in the superconducting limit. It's actually not due to JLab, largely it was due to the fact that there are delays here in the other end. And we nevertheless finished 60 days early compared to the baseline, and spent all the money, 1.4 billion, apart from something like $6 or $7 million that were still there. It's kind of interesting to look back for some of our project geeks here, to look at the baseline at the very beginning, and then look at what people spent extra money on. So where did they do well on estimating, and where they didn't do well? And JLab put in $10 million. That was actually extra scope that we asked them to do, actually delivered on the system. So we finished the project on budget and on time. It still is some of the greatest successes from my point of view in the Office of Science, and today is considered, for various reasons, to be one of the models of doing large mega science projects. And that's a great thing. So Claus was part of all of this, coming back to the stealth type, he sailed through this, apart from the little weekly Ray Orbach story, pretty much without major damage, I think. Not so that many others. So what does retirement really mean, Claus? I don't know. For some of us, it means just not being employed anymore by a former employee, still going to meetings and all kinds of stuff. I think that's true for at least probably 80% of people in the first two rows here. For others, it might be really meaning going, sailing into the sunset. So I wonder where you're going to be when we call you, and I might do that. So thank you very much for the time I put you on the work.
Thank you, Norbert. Okay, so we have one final talk. The speaker is Alison Long. She received a PhD in 1992 from American University. She has done electron scattering experiments at SLAP, at DAISY, and here at Jefferson Lab. She was the project manager on the G0 experiment, and for the last several years, she and Claus have been the leaders of the 12GV upgrade, which is very close to not needing Team 4. Alison Long.
Thank you. So you should appreciate that none of us have actually seen each other's presentations, but there's going to be themes that I'm going to tie up here now, I realize, as I've seen the other presentations. The first being, of course, a whole lot more trees have been removed from the area. So the triangle is still basically Jefferson Lab campus, but much of the trees on this side is now gone for the famous tech center that's still underway. And the expansion since the original CBAF now, of course, has the entire Hall D complex at this end, and most of the rest of the upgrades are underground, so you don't see them in this picture. Now, I took the chronology for the 12GeV upgrade and I broke it in a slightly different way than some of you might. Very specifically, I have before project, which is also known as the Herman Brunder era. Then we become a project, and there's a transition to Christoph, Dennis Kovar, and Dan Lehman while we're being a project. The project continued with Christoph handing off to Mont, and Dennis Kovar handing over to Tim Hallman, and during the construction also, Dan Lehman turning over to Steve Metter. Broadly, you can map this out to critical decision schedule and all the work that leads up to getting an NSAC long-range plan. One thing you might notice is originally this was thought to be maybe a 6 to 10 year project at the outside. If you look from 1994 to 2014, that's 20 years, and we're not done yet. The constant, the theme, the leader through this entire period is Claus. The only single person involved directly with the development and management of the 12GeV upgrade for 20 plus years. Which is why I named the fourth category of time, AP, 12GeV AP, after project. That doesn't mean CD4B, that means that Claus has retired. So let me go and walk you through a bit of the highlights in each of these eras. Before you can get to a project, you first have to talk about what science is going to drive it. The first of those was in 1994, here in this auditorium. Rolf was able to actually dig up the only copy we know of, the hard copy of the proceedings from that workshop. This was followed in 98 by physics and instrumentation with 6 to 12GeV beams. So we've gone from the concept to now we're going to go to what actually is the hardware that's needed. 2001, it got very detailed for the accelerator upgrades, and a white paper was developed. A theme you're going to hear from the 12GeV team often is Claus has a creative way of spelling many things, and I'll point out that this 2001 paper didn't even spell Jefferson correctly. Also in 2001, in preparation for the long-range plan exercise at that time, was the science driving the 12GeV upgrade of CBAF. What was the science? Of course, it all starts with the science. That document laid out 5 campaigns. Test the origin of quark confinement, how the nuclear building blocks get made from quarks and gluons, the origin of the nucleon-nucleon force, test the limits of a meson-nucleon description of nuclei, and probing the limits of the standard model. Now that you have the science, you have to map that onto the equipment that you want to build for the upgrade. We had 3 halls. The new science in this list of campaigns is looking at the origin of quark confinement. It was clear that a 4th hall was going to be necessary in order to add that capability to our complex. So if you look broadly for Hall B, you can talk about that's going to get at nucleon structure through GPDs. Hall D, quark confinement. Hall C is going to push out into the quark properties of nucleons and nuclei. And Hall A becomes the installation, the home of the large installation experiments, particularly focused with an exciting future on testing the standard model. What you'll see interesting if you look at the approved science program is in fact any one of these campaigns is being addressed in multiple halls. How do you do an accelerator upgrade? You've heard about what was needed for cryomodule performance to get from the original 4 GeV to 6 GeV. We have to get to 12, but we want to keep the footprint the same. The cost would be unattainable if you had to change the footprint of the machine. And so working from this footprint, decision taken, put Hall D at the opposite end. As Richard mentioned, while the civil footprint had already been determined, once it went to a 5-pass machine, only 20 cryomodules of the existing technology were installed in the tunnel. Thank you very much, you gave us empty space. So with the increased technology of the cryomodule performance, in 1/4 the space, we could double the acceleration that the electrons would experience. Now, of course, as Norbert just mentioned, yes, you could get that performance out of a cryomodule under certain conditions, under certain times. Well, this upgrade was going to require 40 of these to be built here that would work to these specifications. And so what you're looking at is you need to get enough technical headroom. About 19.2 was the spec set for megavolts per meter, but at a high enough efficiency that you could actually build them and get reliable 12GeV performance. Now remember, we don't have a project yet. So this is the risk that the folks in the pre-project team have to address. And so here's my version of how the story evolved. Christoph worked very hard to convince Herman that even though it hadn't yet been demonstrated, it would be demonstrated. And you would get the 19.2 megavolts for an average cavity. You will notice that there is alcohol involved in this conversation. Of course, then the prototype cavity test results came out, and here is Herman celebrating that in fact those results were achieved. Now we can go forward to DOE with a project plan that technically will be met. And the constant through all of this discussion, from 94 to 2004 with CD0, is Claus. Not only the technical guru, but in his own steady way, really the cheerleader for this technology being able to deliver the science. So now we've got a project. Christoph, Herman is handed off to Christoph. Dennis Kovar is the one at DOE Nuclear Physics that is shepherding us through this process. The 2002 long-range plan, really spearheaded by Larry Cardman. Eureka, 2004, we have mission need. Of course, once you get that, you get layman reviews. And so we first had the announcement of CD0. Here's the NSAC long-range plan. Here is Ray Orbach, who Norbert just told you about, who came to Jefferson Lab to announce Critical Decision 0 for the 12 GeV upgrade. Here's then Senator John Warner of Virginia standing down in the hall with all of the dignitaries to celebrate CD0. Where we ended up was with the scope of a project by 2007 being defined that had a new hall. It had upgrades of new spectrometers in halls B and C. For the accelerator, you needed 10 new cryomodules. You had to basically double the entire CHL plant. Add a 10th arc down here so that you could get a 5.5 pass down to where you needed it in Hall D. And oh, by the way, every one of the arc magnets and supplies had to be taken apart, refurbished, upgraded, and reinstalled. So we celebrated very happily when CD2 was announced. You'll see some faces here of folks who are no longer here and or on the project team. Claus, of course, is the constant through all of this. If you could start the video. In case some of you haven't seen this or aren't familiar with it, it's a nice little video that shows now going through the second pass and the third pass, you get closer to the ground, fourth pass, fifth pass, and it's this last half pass that gets you out to Hall D. The good news is we've moved past the conceptualization of the civil construction. Of course, when you start construction, Claus said, okay, let's be clear. We're going to build the accelerator, we're going to build Hall D first and fast. And then what we need to do for B and C, because they have superconducting magnets in them, which are very high-risk items, we'll do those in parallel, but we won't give them the full effort until the accelerator and the civil is done. Turned out to be very wise. So here's the racetrack. We're looking back towards it for the Hall D complex. We started construction in 2008, which was exactly the time for Christoph to hand off to Mont, and we get the start of the project continued phase for Mont, Tim Hallman, and eventually through the construction phase, Dan handing over to Steve. Here is clearly a closeout from a Dan Lehman review, with all of us looking very studiously at the words in the closeout slides, while the poor speaker is trying to actually tell us something, but we're too busy reading all of the papers. Here is a good place for me to point out that also in this time period leading up to the start of construction, Joe May handed off to Mike Epps as Federal Project Director in the site office. Joanne Gillow and Jim Hawkins have been steady throughout from the Office of Nuclear Physics. And here we have the most recent review photo with Steve Metter. So we went from 2008 to start. Here's a 2011 photo to this version of the civil construction. Now you can see Hall D with its counting house, the beam line, and the tunnel extension right there. More trees lost. Here's the photo from a slightly different perspective, so you can see the tunnel extension. Another bit of serendipity that we can't find anyone to take credit for is that there's an extension of the underground tunnel. There was a stub there that we could connect to.
That was Tony.
Tony, you're going to... Yay, he raised his hand. So now we have an answer to the question. Thank you, Tony. That meant that we didn't have to do any drilling or excavating. It was cut and cover, which made that part of the civil construction very straightforward. So we're moving along. 2011, 2012. By the time we get to 2014, 100% of the accelerator construction is done. So you have cryo modules. You always know these large blue things are going to be your refrigeration systems. Here's some RF separators, power supplies for the magnets, and here's arc magnets. Just to give people a sense of the scale of what had to be dealt with, we reused almost everything that was in the tunnel. We upgraded or replaced all of the existing recirculation and transport elements. So we're talking 350 major dipole magnets, more than 700 quads, thousands of power supplies, 1,000 diagnostics, 5 kilometers of vacuum line. All were taken apart, upgraded, refurbished, and reconfigured. Of course, the new ARC-10 increased those numbers even more. Now we have to go from having the accelerator done and the civil done to demonstrating to DOE that in fact we had met all of the criteria for a split critical decision 4, which is project completion. 4A in this case is the accelerator and the start of operations being approved. And the success story that follows the construction is the speed and efficiency with which the accelerator came back online and was able to demonstrate not only the performance parameters for the KPP project piece, but also for the physics level requirements as well. And that is definitely a nod to the talent and dedication of the accelerator team. And so you see here, this green in the middle is showing over a period of a couple of weeks, ramping up the energy to be greater than 10 GeV, which was the KPP requirement for getting into Hall D. Here you see the approval letter that says the KPPs and the scope for CD4A has been complete. A very important part of this, we talk about projects and what's it like to do projects these days. The accelerator readiness review is a very large component that wasn't present in earlier projects in exactly the same way. And so we had a very dedicated team with the site office, with Office of Nuclear Physics, and with our own team. We phased the accelerator readiness reviews. We aligned it with the new accelerator safety order and had to coordinate very closely with the site office and Joe Arango in particular, our site office manager, to get all of that done. So we're done with the civil, we're done with the accelerator. Next up in the queue is Hall D construction. So you saw the outside of it. The nice thing about Hall D, it's only half below ground, half above ground, half below ground, because it's photon science. And so I want to show you a little time-lapse photography of the construction of the detectors in Hall D. And so what you'll see here is this will start to fill up with detectors, individual modules of a calorimeter. All the cryogenics being installed on top of the solenoid magnet. You'll see in a moment here on the side is the cradle. Whoops, don't cover it up. the cradle that's building wedges of the barrel calorimeter that will go down the center here. We filled up the entire detector, and this module is ready to go down in the board. That's a time lapse of probably more than a year of effort, but it's fun to watch these things actually raise out of the ground, so to speak. What's left to do? We finished the accelerator, Hall A, we finished civil, we finished Hall B. What's left are the spectrometers in Halls B and C. For those of you who haven't been down in the hall recently, here's a snapshot of how much progress has already been made in Hall B. Here is the detectors that are already installed. There's 3 layers of detectors already here. Another sector of this detector being installed with this strong back. Right here is the first of 2 magnets that will be installed in Hall B. This is the torus magnet. And here are the people here for scale. Hall C, different layout for the spectrometer. This has 5 magnets in series with a horizontal bend delivered here from Michigan State more than a year ago. The Q1 magnet here a year ago. And here are the yokes for the remaining magnets that still have to be done. That's a second quad, a third quad, and a dipole magnet. In fact, all of the detectors are built and all the rear detectors are already installed. So I couldn't resist, Klaus, to actually do a back of the envelope look at, from the time of CD0 to now, how much of our lives have we spent just standing in front of review committees. Not all the prep, not the dry runs, not putting briefing material together. The first layman review was in 2005, and for 5 years we actually only had 1 per year. That all changed in 2010, and we averaged 3 per year from 2010 through 2013, and we continue to average under OPA led by Steve Metter, 2 per year. We already have the second one in 16 scheduled. And so I took a look. If I just take these 21 check marks, and they're about 2.2 days, we got 46 days of standing in front of the committees. We responded to 252 recommendations. I want to point out to you that 9 of them are still open, and some of them have your name on them. If I add to that the director's reviews, we had 4 temple reviews, that's another 8 days. We had 12 system reviews, another 24 days, another 100 recommendations to respond to there. So if you do the math, you have spent 4 months, 16 weeks, you have spent 4 months standing in front of review committees in defense of the 12-JEV project. Thank you very much. Because we spent this much time in front of review committees, I thought you all might enjoy just a little photo journey through these reviews. So here's one of the earliest ones. Here's Andrew, Dennis, Chapone, and Christoph in the main control. Here we have Rolf giving a description of Hall A to Danny and to Jim Turi. This, I believe, is Mont's first review over in the test lab with the team photo. This photo of Danny Manouche and Glenn Young looking down the barrel of what will be the center for the detectors in Hall D. This must have been a good review because everybody's smiling. And in case you didn't see the Hall D solenoid before it was put together, here are the individual coils of what is now the Hall D solenoid magnet. And this, I believe, is Danny's last review with us in 2013, and there's the team. And so, Danny, thank you for torturing us as you did and moving us along. And thank you for taking a photo of your team every year when you're here, because the archive turns out to be quite nice. All right, so now we're into after project. Klaus is retired. How do we judge this? Well, look at this on the date of his departure. This project was almost 98% complete, with an SPI of 0.99 and a CPI of 0.97. The percent obligated was about 328 out of a $338 million project, essentially finished. So what's done, right? You're 98% done, you don't really have any money left. Okay, you got a few of these pesky superconducting magnets, 5 to be exact, that you have to finish and commission. And then you have to put beam in the halls and get the key performance parameters done. So I could slant it that way and say, huh, there's nothing left, thank you so much. But now if I put myself in Klaus's shoes, this is what I would put on the slide. Those superconducting magnets we mentioned are the highest risk items in the project. How many exclamation points can I fit on one line? How red can I make the font? And how large can I make each letter? And so I was asked by multiple people on the team to fit this in to this presentation somewhere. I made it rotate. If you could in your emails have made them rotate, you probably would have. So of course, running through all of this is this Project Management Order 413.3. What does that mean if you're in a Claus Rode managed project? It means put as much information on a single graph as you can. It means put as many colors as you possibly can on the graph, and then you hope that the question that they ask, you can answer, as Norbert said, with a yes or a no. So nobody really fully understands in that quick all of the messages in that graph, so I know I can just answer yes or no, and we're done and we're moving on. Now this is the one that is most specific and particular to Klaus, the Hunt for Red October, which started back in FEL review days. Admiral Watkins, yes. And so, of course, you're looking at your cost performance against your schedule performance, and you want to stay somewhere inside this red circle, which means you're kind of mostly staying on cost and schedule. Now, a very wise person, Christoph Lehmann, the first time this was put up in front of him for a 12-JEV review, said, "Excuse me, why do I have to stay inside the circle? Why can't I just have this whole quadrant as my goal? Why can't I be ahead of schedule and under budget?" Well, of course you can't. That's just by law, apparently. We almost never spent any time out here. That's the reality, Christoph. We tried, we set it as the goal, it didn't work. And here's the labor profile that was tracked by Klaus in gory detail. 18 different skill types. This is over 7 years. Peak labor, right around 200. Considering the whole lab only has 700 people here, that's pretty impressive. And of course, we use as much color as we can, and or put as much little detailed, colored and dashed and dotted lines. And don't forget the extrapolations that go on every one of these plots. All right, that's project management Claus Rode style. I then went out to the team and said, I'd like you to contribute. Tell me in a phrase, how would you describe working for Claus Rode? I wrote the sentence and said, fill in the blank. Working for Klaus on 12 GeV was like, fill in the blank. Working for my dad. Adventures in alternate spelling. Trying to solve the Rubik's Cube, Jenga, Tetris, and roller derby all at once. Hiking along a dimly lit trail in a dark forest while hearing cries of, no, you do not need better boots or a better flashlight. Being inside a washing machine, you get very agitated, you come out with a clean review report, and then you're all wrung out. You're flying through the eye of a hurricane. You're running a marathon through a maze. You're traveling in a high-speed train, but with lessons and experiences at every stop. You're on a carnival ride, lots of loops, spins, drops, but you're sure it will end well. And then you're sharing the highway in your little tiny Austin Cooper with a Mack truck. So we took the decision not to identify who contributed which of these lines, We thought it would be fun for you to guess who submitted which of these bullets. What you'll see if you have worked closely with Claus is themes that run through this. When you ask his team members, what is it like to work with Claus on a project like this? Absolutely unending energy. Wisdom brought to every discussion, whether it's technical or management. An indomitable spirit, as down as we might get about the magnets and the schedule delays and whatnot, you know he's going to bounce back. And bottom line is just leadership. 20 plus years of leadership on this project. So I want to leave you with a little synopsis of a legacy as we view your time here. Sure, you trained a generation or maybe two to be cryogenics experts. That's really impressive. Then you decided that wasn't enough of a challenge, and you, crazy person that you are, said, heck, I can take a physicist or an engineer and I can turn him into a project manager. And then you spent the next 15 years teaching dozens of us how to approach our work in a way that really makes sense. To now look at the 12 GeV upgrade, as you've left us, we're already accomplishing early science. We've commissioned the 12 GeV accelerator. We've already delivered beam to 3 halls simultaneously. You can see here an example of the kinds of science questions that are already being addressed and published. And in fact, the first experiment of the 12 GeV era was already completed this summer. That's pretty impressive. And so Claus, as you're sailing off into the sunset, please know that you go with our deepest gratitude. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. That's the end of the afternoon session. Almost immediately, food and drink is available in the atrium, where we're going to have some speeches this evening, starting around about 6:15 or so. So you got a chance to eat and drink, and then you get to listen to a few more words of wisdom. But let me finish by saying, encouraging you perhaps to give a round of applause for all the speakers this afternoon.